Have you ever seen a real titan of industry just completely stumble? I mean, a company so big that one wrong move sends shockwaves through the whole tech world. Well, back in 2012, that's exactly what happened to Microsoft with Windows 8. And what followed was this mad scramble to fix it all, a project that was part update, part course correction, and honestly, part apology.
Okay, let's really let that sink in for a second. This wasn't just a handful of bad reviews. The press, the entire tech world, was comparing Windows 8 to New Coke. We're talking about maybe the biggest, most infamous product disaster in modern history. So, when people are talking about your flagship software and New Coke in the same breath, you don't just have a problem, you have a full-blown crisis on your hands.
So, to really get why Windows 8.1 even had to exist, we've got to go back and understand the sheer scale of the crisis that was Windows 8. See, Microsoft didn't just release a new operating system, they tried to kick off a revolution. And, well, it backfired spectacularly.
I mean, Microsoft's vision here was incredibly bold. They looked around, they saw the future was touch, smartphones and tablets, and they bet the entire Windows farm on it. They just ripped out the most familiar things, like the Start button and the Start menu that we'd been using for decades, and swapped them for this radical, tile-based start screen. It was all about swiping and tapping, not clicking.
And that was the huge problem, right? While Microsoft was busy chasing the future, they kind of forgot about the hundreds of millions of people who were still living in the present. Their core users, all of us with a mouse and a keyboard, we felt totally lost. Simple things suddenly became complicated. All that muscle memory we'd built up over the years? Useless. The backlash wasn't just loud, it was instant.
So you better believe Microsoft heard all that criticism loud and clear. They knew they had to respond and they had to do it fast. This kicked off a super rapid development project, a direct answer to all those complaints flooding in, and it all came together a lot faster than anybody expected.
And this was it, Windows 8.1. Internally, they called it Project Blue. Now, releasing a major update just 1 year after a new version was, well, that was almost unheard of for Microsoft. But this wasn't just a normal update. This was damage control, and its mission was crystal clear. Fix the biggest complaints about Windows 8 and try to win back our trust.
And the very first thing they did, the most symbolic fix, was bringing back the Start button. Now listen, it didn't open the old Start menu, not yet anyway. It just took you back to that tile-based Start screen. But just seeing it there on the taskbar was everything. I love this quote from a Windows manager who called it a warm blanket. It was like this little visual anchor, a small piece of home telling users, hey, it's okay, we hear you. And it wasn't just about the button. Microsoft actually started handing control back to us. One of the biggest annoyances with Windows 8 was being thrown into that tile screen every single time you turned on your computer. With 8.1, you could finally choose to just skip it entirely and boot straight to the traditional desktop we all knew. That was a huge, huge concession. And just look at how they marketed this thing. This table is so fascinating. On the left, you've got all the features from Windows 7. The version everybody loved. And on the right, Windows 8.1. And just look at those check marks. Microsoft is basically saying, see, everything you liked about 7, the desktop, the mouse support, it's all still here, and you get all this new cool stuff like touch, apps from the store, and a faster startup. It was this perfect message of both reassurance and progress all in one shot. But while bringing back the Start button got all the headlines, it would be a huge mistake to think that's all they changed. Nope. Windows 8.1 was a massive update under the hood, fixing not just these big philosophical problems, but a ton of practical ones too. I mean, the sheer scope of the improvements was pretty huge. You had cloud storage with SkyDrive, which later became OneDrive, baked right into the file system. The search function was supercharged by Bing, so it could pull results from your PC, your apps, and the web all at once. We got a whole new browser with IE 11, much better multi-monitor support, and these really important quality-of-life fixes like automatic app updates. This really was a substantial upgrade. One of my personal favorite fixes was this one right here. In the original Windows 8, multitasking with those new Metro apps was so clunky. You could only snap 2 side by side, and one was always stuck in this tiny little sidebar. But in 8.1, things got way more flexible. Suddenly, you could snap up to 4 apps, and you could give them equal 50-50 screen space. This made using those new apps for actual work so much more realistic. And here's a really smart, strategic move that a lot of people overlook. Microsoft made Windows 8.1 leaner, so it could run on less powerful hardware. Now, this was absolutely crucial because it let manufacturers build much cheaper tablets and laptops,
which helped Windows actually compete against that rising tide of low-cost Chromebooks and Android devices. So Windows 8.1 definitely fixed a lot, but what was its ultimate legacy? Was it really a success? Well, the answer is complicated. It's probably best to see it not as the final destination, but as a really critical bridge to something much, much better.
The numbers here tell such a fascinating story. Windows 8.1 was, for sure, more successful than the original, peaking at over 13% market share. But compare that to the original Windows 8, which barely hit 8%. Still, let that sink in, only 13%. It never got anywhere close to the kind of dominance Windows 7 had before it, or what Windows 10 would have after it. It basically stopped the bleeding, but it definitely didn't win the war.
And that's really because, at its heart, it was still a compromise. It sort of papered over the cracks between the touch world and the desktop world, but it never really truly brought them together. You were still constantly jumping between two totally different environments. It was better, for sure, but it still felt kinda disjointed.
And this timeline really shows its whole journey. It launched in late 2013, its mainstream support ended 5 years later in 2018, and then finally, its extended support, the last of the security patches, that ended for good in January 2023. It had a respectable run, but it was always living in the shadow of what came before and what was coming next. Ultimately, the real legacy of Windows 8.1 wasn't the software itself. It was the lesson that Microsoft learned. That new Coke crisis forced the company to start listening to its users again. And that painful feedback is exactly what led directly to Windows 10, which finally managed to blend the old and the new and became one of the most beloved versions of Windows ever.
So that leaves us with this one last question. How should we really remember Windows 8.1? Was it just a necessary failure, just another part of the whole Windows 8 stumble on the road to something better? Or was it more than that? Was it the humble, critical apology that kept millions of people from jumping ship and, in the end, saved the future of Windows? It's something to think about.